Sections 37 and 38 and note of how to sing. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ruth Golding. How to Sing by Lily Lehmann. Translated by Richard Aldrich. Section 37. Interpretation. Let us return to the subject of expression and examine a song. For example, Der Nussbaum by Schumann. The prevailing mood through it is one of quiet gaiety, consequently one demanding a pleasant expression of countenance. The song picture must rustle by us like a fairy story. The picture shows us the fragrant nut tree putting forth its leaves in the spring. Under it a maiden lost in reverie, who finally falls asleep, happy in her thoughts. All is youth and fragrance, a charming little picture whose colours must harmonize. None of them should stand out from the frame. Only one single word rises above the rustling of the tree, and this must be brought plainly to the hearing of the listening maiden, and hence also of the public. The second, next year. The whole song finds its point in that one word. The nut tree before the house puts forth its green leaves and sheds its fragrance. Its blossoms are lovingly embraced by the soft breezes, whispering to each other two by two, and offer their heads to be kissed, nodding and bowing. The song must be sung with an equal fragrance, each musical phrase in one breath, that is, with 6 inaudible breathings, without ritenuto. They whisper of a maiden who night and day is thinking, she knows not of what herself. Between selber and nicht was, a slight separation of the words can be made by breaking off the R in selber nasally, and holding the tone nasally without taking a fresh breath, attacking the nicht anew. In this way, an expression of uncertainty is lent to the words nicht was. But now all becomes quite mysterious. They whisper, they whisper. One must bend one's thoughts to hear it. Who can understand so soft a song? But now I hear plainly, even though it be very soft, the whisper about the bridegroom and the next year, and again, quite significantly, the next year. That is so full of promise, one can scarcely tear oneself away from the thoughts, from the word in which love is imparted, and yet that too comes to an end. Now I am the maiden herself, who listens, smiling in happiness, to the rustling of the tree, leaning her head against its trunk, full of longing fancies as she sinks to sleep and to dream, from which she would wish never to awaken. Fällt Einsamkeit by Brahms. This song interprets the exalted mood of the soul of the man who, lying at rest in the long grass, watches the clouds float by, and whose being is made one with nature as he does so. A whole world of insects buzzes about him, the air shimmers in the bright sunlight, flowers shed their perfume. Everything about him lives a murmuring life in tones that seem to enhance the peace of nature, far from the haunts of men. As tranquil as are the clouds that pass by, as peaceful as is the mood of nature, as luxurious as are the flowers that spread their fragrance, so tranquil and calm must be the breathing of the singer, which draws the long phrases of the song over the chords of the accompaniment, and brings before us in words and tones the picture of the warm peace of summer in nature, and the radiant being of a man dissolved within it. I mark the breathing places with V. Ich liege still im hohen grünen Gras, breath, und sende lange meinen Blick, breath, nach oben, breath, and again comfortably, calmly, nach oben. Von Grillen rings umschwärmt, breath, ohn Unterlass, breath, von Himmelsbläuer wundersam umwoben, breath, von Himmelsbläuer, breath, wundersam umwoben. Each tone, each letter, is connected closely with the preceding and following. The expression of the eyes and of the soul should be appropriate to that of the glorified peace of nature and of the soul's happiness. The last phrase should soar tenderly, saturated with a warm and soulful colouring. Die schönen weißen Wolken ziehen dahin, breath, durchs tiefe Blau, breath, I gaze at it for a moment. Wie schöne, stille Träume, breath, losing oneself. Wie schöne, stille Träume, breath. A feeling of dissolution takes away every thought of living and being. Mir ist, breath, als ob, breath, ich längst, breath, gestorben bin. The whole being is dissolved in the ether. The end comes with outstretched wings soaring above the earth. Und ziehe selig mit, breath, durch ew'ge Räume, breath, und ziehe selig mit, breath, durch ew'ge Räume. Dissolution of the soul in the universe must sound forth from the singer's tone. The Erlking by Schubert. For him who is familiar with our native legends and tales, the willows and alders in the fields and by the brooks are peopled with hidden beings, fairies and witches. They stretch out ghostly arms as their veils wave over their loose hair. They bow, cower, raise themselves, become as big as giants or as little as dwarfs. They seem to lie in wait for the weak to fill them with fright. The father, however, who rides with his child through the night and the wind, is a man, no ghost, and his faithful steed that carries both, no phantom. The picture is presented to us vividly. We can follow the group for long. The feeling is of haste, but not of ghostliness. The prelude should consequently sound simply fast, but not overdrawn. The first phrases of the singer should be connected with it as a plain narrative. Suddenly, the child hugs the father more closely and buries his face in terror in his bosom. Lovingly the father bends over him. Quietly he asks him the cause of his fear. Frightened, the child looks to one side and asks in disconnected phrases whether his father does not see the Erlking with his crown and train. They had just ridden by a clump of willows. Still quietly, the father explains smilingly to his son that what he saw was a bank of fog hanging over the meadow. But in the boy's brain the Erlking has already raised his enticing whisper. Footnote: the voice of the Erlking is a continuous, soft, uninterrupted stream of tone, upon which the whispered words are hung. The Erlking excites the thoughts of the fever-sick boy. The three enticements must be sung very rapidly, without any interruption of the breath. The first I sing as far as possible in one breath, if I am not hampered by the accompanist, or at most in two. The second in two, the third in three. And here, for the first time, the words reizt and brauch ich Gewalt emerge from the whispered pianissimo. End of footnote. The still, small voice, as though coming from another world, promises the child golden raiment, flowers, and games. Fearfully, he asks his father if he does not hear the Erl-King's whispered promises. It is only the dry leaves rustling in the wind. The father quiets him, and his voice is full of firm and loving reassurance, but he feels that his child is sick. For but a few seconds all is still. Then the voice comes back again. In a low whisper, sounds and words are distinguished. Erl-King invites the boy to play with his daughters, who shall dance with him and rock him and sing to him. In the heat of fever, the boy implores his father to look for the Erl-King's daughters. The father sees only an old grey willow, but his voice is no longer calm. Anxiety for his sick child makes his manly tones break. The comforting words contain already a longing for the journey's end. Quickly, quickly must he reach it. Erl-King has now completely filled the feverish fancy of the child. With ruthless power he possesses himself of the boy. All opposition is vain. The silver cord is loosened. Once more he cries out in fear to his father. Then his eyes are closed. The man, beside himself, strains every nerve, his own and his horse's. His haste is like a wild flight. The journey's end is reached. Breathless they stop. But the race was in vain. A cold shudder runs through even the narrator. His whole being is strained and tense. He must force his mouth to utter the last words. Der Spielmann by Schumann. If the critics were to study as eagerly as the finished artist, there would be enough material on hand for stimulating discussions from which the public at large would profit. Thus lying before me is a letter on music wherein one of my last concerts, but more especially Schumann's Spielmann, is the theme of discussion. Would it not be interesting to the public to learn how such songs find interpretation in the artist? This song had long claimed my attention. The text is constructed on one idea in which the fate of three human beings is decided in cruel shortness of time. This appealed to me, an interesting picture and a well-adapted composition. A small rural wedding with music and dance. The pale bride. The Spielmann, who is not the bridegroom but who plays for the dance, pressing the fiddle so strongly against his heart that it breaks in 1,000 pieces. A compassionate spectator to whom it is painful to see so young a heart, which craves for happiness, perish. The Spielmann's sudden outburst of insanity puts an end to his meditation. A poor Musikant lowers his frightened glance and prays to God to save him from such a terrible end. The whole song is over in a flash. One only begins to comprehend it at the outburst of insanity, and before one has fully realized all, the poor Musikant has finished his prayer, and then, very softly, as from a great distance, a faint strain of the dance melody reaches our ear. It is seen how everything concentrates itself on the insane outburst, and yet to this phrase, like all others composed on 3 notes of the middle range, accents of expression cannot be given. But I attempt it. The song is mine. I possess it absolutely, and in my inmost soul know how it ought to sound. I must cry it out from the depth of my soul, with all pain and grief, cry it, declaiming it. No, not yet. I again strive to follow the composer. I sing the passage 100 times this way and that, and still another way. My listeners, that is my family or an intimate friend, think it excellent. I am indignant. What do they understand? I feel that the effect must be quite different. I can get it vocally, and as in a picture I can characterize the insanity with widely dilated, terrified eyes and gnashing teeth, vivid enough to affect a few people who stand near. But how can it be effective in a hall that seats 2,000 people? Yes, even in a spacious room it would merely be a thought and not action, and action it must nearly be. Nearly, not quite. Despite all reverence for the composer, or rather because I want to do him justice, I must cry it out with all my heart from my inmost self, and now I feel released. This is what I needed. There remains only to establish the limit, the just measure of beauty, and the end is attained. Then I have made it mine. The given music now facilitates matters, and I follow the composer's restrictions, not too high, not too low, only the exact tone appropriate to a tormented soul in a song of modest limits. Now, devoting a couple of weeks to diligent study, I am able to do justice to Schumann's composition. No, I am no friend of extremes. Everything has its limits, and art especially must ever be mindful of it. Neither in grief nor in happiness, in gentleness nor in brutality, may we indulge in exaggeration. We must never go beyond the line of beauty. In only a few cases may genius be allowed to overstep the bounds, but this exaggeration is only produced through sublimity of expression, not through brutality. I am reminded of the answer given me by a celebrated Shakespearean actress upon being asked if she acted the part of Juliet. "I'll not act Juliet until I am a grandmother." The response is significant of the respect which certain roles inspire in great artists. They labour over them a lifetime, never thinking them fit for presentation. In a small way I too can furnish an example of these scruples. As a young girl I sang with great pleasure Schumann's Frauenliebe und Leben. Later I let it alone. I realized more and more how deep, how great certain ones are. Such a world of feeling. Is it really possible to sing them? It seemed to me that I was too weak for the task, and yet how gladly I would sing them. Alas, there is no prospect of my ever becoming grandmother. End of section 37. Section 38. In conclusion. The class of voice is dependent upon the inborn characteristics of the vocal organs. But the development of the voice, and all else that appertains to the art of song, can, providing talent is not lacking, be learned through industry and energy. If every singer cannot become a famous artist, every singer is at least in duty bound to have learned something worth while, and to do his best according to his powers as soon as he has to appear before any public. As an artist, he should not afford this public merely a cheap amusement, but should acquaint it with the most perfect embodiments of that art whose sole task properly is to ennoble the taste of mankind and to bestow happiness, to raise it above the miseries of this workaday world, withdraw it from them, to idealize even the hateful things in human nature which it may have to represent, without departing from truth. But what is the attitude of artists towards these tasks? Cleveland, January the 11th, 1902. End of section 38. Note: a good remedy for catarrh and hoarseness. Pour boiling hot water into a saucer and let a large sponge suck it all up. Then squeeze it firmly out again. Hold the sponge to the nose and mouth and breathe alternately through the nose and mouth, in and out. I sing my exercises, the great scale, passages, etc., and all the vowels into it, and so force the hot steam to act upon the lungs, bronchial tubes, and especially on the mucous membranes, while I am breathing in and out through the sponge. After this has been kept up for 10 or 15 minutes, wash the face in cold water. This can be repeated 4 to 6 times a day. The sponge should be full of water and must be quite squeezed out. This has helped me greatly, and I can recommend it highly. It can do no injury because it is natural. But after breathing in the hot steam, do not go out immediately into the cold air. End of note. End of How to Sing by Lily Lehmann. Translated by Richard Aldrich.